For as long as I could remember, my sister, Evelyn, had been my closest confidant and fiercest competitor. We were both born with an insatiable curiosity, a hunger for discovery that made us the odd ones out in our small town. While other kids played outside, we buried ourselves in books, dismantling radios to understand their inner workings and debating the laws of physics over breakfast. It was this shared passion that led me to my greatest research project, a breakthrough in sustainable energy storage that could change the world. Months of sleepless nights, failed experiments, and meticulous calculations had finally led to a discovery so significant that the International Scientific Society had shortlisted me for their prestigious Innovation Award. But then, everything changed. One evening, as I sorted through my research papers, I noticed something odd. Some of my notes were missing. At first, I thought I had misplaced them, but as I searched through my files, my chest tightened with unease. Entire sections of my findings were gone. The feeling of paranoia slithered through my veins, but I dismissed it, until the announcement came the following week. Evelyn had submitted my research, and she was being recognized for it. I stared at the screen in disbelief as her name flashed in bold letters across the conference website. She had entered the competition under her own name, claiming my work as hers. My breath caught in my throat, and a strange mix of fury and heartbreak welled up inside me. How could she do this? How could she steal the one thing I had worked so hard to create? The betrayal cut deeper than I could have ever imagined. But I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I waited, biding my time, knowing that the final stage of the competition required a practical demonstration. And that was where the truth would come to light. Because there was one thing Evelyn didn't know. I had deliberately left a crucial step out of my notes, a step only I knew how to execute. And when the moment came, I would be there to watch it all unfold. I didn't confront Evelyn right away. Instead, I watched. She carried herself with an air of confidence, reveling in the attention she was getting from the scientific community. News articles praised her brilliance, her supposed groundbreaking discovery. The scientific world had always been a battleground dominated by egos, and Evelyn had just positioned herself as a rising star. At home, she acted as though nothing had changed between us. She still laughed at our inside jokes, still asked me about my day, still made tea the way I liked it. But I saw the shift in her eyes. She was waiting for me to say something, to challenge her. And I refused to give her the satisfaction. Instead, I prepared. The final stage of the competition required the shortlisted candidates to present their work in front of a panel of esteemed scientists and industry leaders. Each nominee had to conduct a live demonstration proving their discovery's functionality. And Evelyn had no idea she had set herself up for failure. The missing step in my research wasn't a small detail. It was everything. My design for sustainable energy storage was delicate, requiring a precise chemical stabilization process. If done incorrectly, the reaction would fizzle out, rendering the system completely useless. It was my safeguard, the one thing that prevented my research from being stolen by competitors. And now, it was the flaw that would expose my sister's lie to the entire world. Still, doubt not at me. Despite everything, Evelyn was my sister. We had built so many dreams together as kids, imagining a future where we'd change the world side by side. Had it all been a lie? Had she always planned to betray me, or had ambition simply led her down this path? I could have stopped her. I could have confronted her, given her a chance to come clean. But then, I thought about all the people who had believed in my work, who had supported me through years of failure before success. My research wasn't just about me. It was about progress, about truth. Evelyn had chosen to betray that truth. And for that, she would have to face the consequences. The night before the final presentation, I sat in my room, staring at the ceiling. My heart was a battlefield of emotions, torn between justice and the remnants of brotherly love. But there was no turning back now. Tomorrow, the world would see Evelyn for what she had done. And there would be no escape. The day of the final presentation arrived with an electric tension in the air. The conference hall buzzed with anticipation, filled with some of the brightest minds in the scientific community. Cameras were set up to broadcast the event live, ensuring the world would witness each breakthrough, or failure, in real time. Evelyn stood among the other finalists, her posture poised, her expression unreadable. If she was nervous, she hid it well. She wore a sleek navy blue suit, professional yet stylish, the kind of attire one would expect from a visionary scientist on the verge of greatness. I sat among the audience, unnoticed, my heart pounding against my ribs. One by one, the finalists stepped onto the stage, showcasing their work with precision and eloquence. Applause followed each demonstration, punctuated by murmurs of approval from the panel of judges. Then, it was Evelyn's turn. She walked onto the stage, radiating confidence, and began her speech. My name is Evelyn Carter, and today, I present a groundbreaking innovation in sustainable energy storage, one that could revolutionize the way we harness and utilize power. I clenched my fists as she spoke, each word a carefully crafted lie. She talked about the years of research, the painstaking process of trial and error, the sheer dedication it had taken to reach this moment. The audience listened intently, their expressions filled with admiration. Then came the demonstration. The device was wheeled onto the stage, a sleek, compact energy cell encased in reinforced glass. It looked exactly as I had designed it. She had followed my schematics down to the last detail, except for the crucial step she never knew was missing. The moment of truth had arrived. Evelyn activated the system, her hands moving with practiced ease as she input the necessary commands. A soft hum filled the air as the energy cell flickered to life. The audience leaned forward, eager to witness the marvel she had promised. And then, nothing. The hum sputtered, wavered, and died. The core of the system, the very heart of my research, failed to stabilize. Evelyn's smile faltered. She tried again, her fingers flying over the controls. The system refused to cooperate. A flicker of panic crossed her face, quickly masked by forced composure. The panel of judges exchanged glances. The audience murmured, shifting in their seats. The tension grew thick, suffocating. I watched as realization dawned in Evelyn's eyes. She didn't understand why it wasn't working. She had followed my notes exactly, or so she thought. But she hadn't truly understood the science behind the design. She had stolen the blueprint, but not the knowledge. One of the judges, an older gentleman with a sharp gaze, cleared his throat. Miss Carter, is there an issue with the demonstration? Evelyn hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. Then, she forced a smile. There seems to be a minor calibration error, she said smoothly. Just give me a moment to adjust. Take your time, the judge said, though there was already a hint of doubt in his voice. The minutes stretched painfully as Evelyn desperately tried to salvage the situation. I could see the strain in her expression, the cracks forming in her confidence. The longer the silence dragged on, the more the weight of her deception pressed down on her. And then, the final blow came. A scientist from the panel, one who had reviewed my initial research before the shortlist was announced, leaned forward. His expression was unreadable, but his words sent a shiver down my spine. Miss Carter, he said, his voice calm yet firm. Can you walk us through the exact stabilization process required for this system to function? The chemical sequence, specifically? Evelyn froze. I held my breath. She had no answer. The trap had been set. And she had walked right into it. Evelyn's fingers twitched at her sides. The question hung in the air, heavy and damning. The chemical sequence? She repeated, buying herself time. The scientist nodded, waiting expectantly. The other judges watched her with sharp eyes, sensing the hesitation, the gap in her knowledge. The audience had gone completely silent, their anticipation shifting into curiosity, then suspicion. I could almost hear her thoughts racing. I knew Evelyn well enough to recognize the cracks forming in her carefully composed facade. She had been so certain, so confident that she had covered her tracks. But now, with all eyes on her, she realized the truth: she hadn't stolen my research. She had stolen an incomplete version of it. She swallowed hard, then straightened, attempting to salvage her credibility. Well, she began. The stabilization process relies on a precise ratio of compounds to ensure energy retention. It's a delicate balance of... Which compounds? The judge interrupted. His expression remained neutral, but there was an unmistakable edge to his voice. Evelyn hesitated. I knew that hesitation well. It was the hesitation of someone who had memorized words but had never truly understood their meaning. A scientist who truly grasped the research would have answered immediately, without faltering. Evelyn, however, had not done the experiments herself. She had not spent nights agonizing over failed results, had not suffered through each revision until the correct answer was found. She had merely copied what she believed was a perfect formula. And now, under scrutiny, she was exposed. The murmurs in the audience grew louder. The judges exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from curiosity to skepticism. Miss Carter? Another judge pressed, waiting for her response. Evelyn's mask cracked. She took a shaky breath. The key component is lithium iodide combined with... No, the first judge interrupted, shaking his head. That's incorrect. If lithium iodide were the primary stabilizing agent, your device wouldn't even power on for the first few seconds. Try again. Evelyn's face paled. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She looked down at her notes, flipping through the pages as if the answer might suddenly appear before her. But it wouldn't. Because I had never written it down. At last, she closed the folder. She clenched her jaw, forcing herself to meet the judge's gazes. There must be a technical issue, she said, her voice steady but hollow. Perhaps an environmental factor interfering with the process. The lead judge exhaled through his nose, unimpressed. Miss Carter, this is a controlled environment. If your research were sound, the demonstration would work regardless. A pause. Then, the final question, the one that would seal her fate. Tell me, Miss Carter, he said, leaning slightly forward. Did you develop this research on your own? The silence was deafening. I watched as Evelyn's entire world came crashing down around her. She stood there, her lips pressed into a thin line, her shoulders tense. Her mind was no doubt scrambling for a way out, for an excuse that might salvage what was left of her reputation. But she knew. She had lost. At last she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Before she could finish, another voice rang through the hall. No, she didn't. I had stood up. And the entire room turned to look at me. A collective hush fell over the hall. Hundreds of eyes shifted toward me, their curiosity sharpening into intrigue. Evelyn's expression froze, her breath catching in her throat. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes, not of failure, but of exposure. I stepped forward, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on my shoulders. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady. My name is Daniel Carter, I said, my gaze locking onto the panel of judges. And the research Evelyn just presented, it's mine. Gasps rippled through the audience. Journalists scrambled to take notes, cameras pivoting in my direction. The judges exchanged sharp glances, their skepticism turning into a deeper scrutiny. The lead judge turned to Evelyn, his expression unreadable. Miss Carter, is this true? Evelyn opened her mouth, then closed it. I could see the war playing out in her mind. Deny it and risk being caught in a bigger lie, or admit the truth and face the consequences? I didn't give her the chance to decide. Allow me to explain, I said, stepping forward. I spent years developing this project, countless hours of trial and error, of failures and breakthroughs. But weeks before the competition, I discovered that key sections of my research had gone missing. I had my suspicions, but I kept quiet, waiting for proof. I turned to Evelyn. And now, here it is. The murmurs in the audience swelled. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Evelyn's hands clenched into fists. Daniel, she said through gritted teeth, her voice barely audible. Don't do this. I ignored her. Instead, I turned to the judges. You asked her to explain the chemical stabilization process, and she failed. That's because she never developed this research, she stole it. And she never knew that I deliberately left out the most critical step. A wave of realization washed over the judges. The first scientist, the one who had caught Evelyn's mistake, exhaled sharply and shook his head. That explains a lot. Evelyn turned to the panel, desperation creeping into her voice. I can fix it, she said quickly. Just give me more time, and I'll. No. The lead judge's voice cut through the noise. His expression had hardened, his patience gone. Science isn't about deception, Miss Carter. It's about integrity. Evelyn's mouth snapped shut. I saw her eyes darting from side to side, looking for an escape. But there was none. Then, the lead judge turned back to me. Mr. Carter, he said, his tone shifting. Are you prepared to demonstrate the correct process? I nodded. Yes. And with that, Evelyn's fate was sealed. Evelyn stood motionless, her confidence shattered, as the judges motioned for me to step onto the stage. I felt the weight of the moment, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. This wasn't just about proving my research was stolen, it was about reclaiming my work, my reputation, and my future. A technician wheeled in a second energy cell, one I had personally constructed before the event, just in case. The panel allowed me to proceed, their expressions a mix of curiosity and growing admiration. I took a deep breath and addressed the audience. The key to this project isn't just the materials used, I began, but how they interact on a molecular level. Without the proper chemical stabilization, the energy core fails, as you've just seen. I glanced at Evelyn, who was staring at the floor, her jaw tight. I turned back to the judges. The missing step is a precise infusion of lanthanum oxide, which acts as a stabilizing agent to prevent rapid energy loss. The scientist who had caught Evelyn's error nodded in understanding. That makes sense. The absence of a rarer stabilizer would explain the failure. I carefully executed the process, my hands steady despite the lingering emotions swirling inside me. The device hummed to life, steady and strong. A blue glow pulsed within the energy cell, a sign of successful stabilization. The audience erupted into applause. I exhaled, feeling a weight lift from my chest. This was what I had worked for. The validation, the proof that my research had value. That I had value. The lead judge smiled, clearly impressed. Well done, Mr. Carter. It's clear you understand this technology inside and out. And it's also clear that you are its true creator. Evelyn flinched at those words, but she remained silent. There was nothing left for her to say. The panel conferred briefly before the head judge turned back to the microphone. Given the evidence presented, and after witnessing the rightful inventor successfully demonstrate his work, we are officially disqualifying Evelyn Carter from the competition. A hush fell over the hall, followed by more murmurs, this time of disappointment, even outrage, directed at Evelyn. One journalist in the front row raised a hand. Does this mean Daniel Carter is now the official finalist for the award? The judge turned to me, his smile returning. If he accepts, yes. Evelyn's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a mixture of anger and panic. For a brief second, I saw her mouth open slightly, as if she was about to beg me not to take this last piece of victory from her. But she had already taken too much from me. I stepped forward, my voice clear. I accept. The room burst into applause. Evelyn turned and walked off the stage without another word. Evelyn disappeared from the stage the moment the applause began, slipping through a side exit like a shadow trying to avoid the rising sun. I didn't follow. I had nothing left to say to her. As the judges officially announced my name as a finalist, I found myself standing at the center of a storm I hadn't quite prepared for. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, voices overlapping as they hurled questions at me. Danielle, how did you discover your research had been stolen? How do you feel about your own sister betraying you? Do you plan to take legal action? I raised a hand, signaling for calm. I'll address everything in time, I said, my voice steady. But today isn't about personal grievances. It's about science. About integrity. The words felt good to say, even though a part of me was still reeling from the events of the past hour. I had expected Evelyn's deception to be exposed, but seeing her humiliation unfold so publicly left me with an odd mix of triumph and sadness. Had she ever truly believed she could get away with it? As the crowd around me swelled, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to see Dr. Richard Hale, one of the most esteemed scientists on the panel, someone whose work I had admired for years. "You handled that well," he said, his gaze sharp but approving. "It's rare to see someone take back what's theirs with such composure." I smiled, but there was a weight behind it. "I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice," he replied. "And you made the right one." His words settled something inside me. I had spent so much time thinking about Evelyn's betrayal, about how much it hurt to see my own sister claim something that wasn't hers. But in the end, my work had spoken for itself. I hadn't needed to expose her; she had done that on her own, the moment she stepped onto that stage without the knowledge to back up her claims. And now, there was no going back for her. As the ceremony concluded, I took one last glance around the hall, half expecting to see Evelyn lingering in the shadows. But she was gone. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly free. But I knew this wasn't over. Evelyn wasn't the type to disappear quietly. Later that evening, I found Evelyn waiting outside my hotel. Her arms were crossed, her face a mixture of anger and desperation. "You humiliated me," she hissed as I approached. I met her gaze unfazed. "You did that yourself." Her jaw clenched. "I was supposed to win, Daniel. I deserved this." "You deserved what? Stealing my work?" I shook my head. "You didn't even understand it." For a moment, something flickered in her eyes, regret maybe. But then, just as quickly it was gone. "This isn't over," she whispered. I sighed. "Yes, Evelyn. It is." I walked past her, leaving her standing there in the cold. News of Evelyn's deception spread fast. The scientific community turned against her, universities withdrew their invitations, and her reputation crumbled. I should have felt satisfied, but instead I just felt tired. She sent me a single message days later. "I never meant to hurt you." I didn't reply. Some betrayals couldn't be undone. Instead, I focused on what mattered, my work, my future, and proving that integrity would always outlast deception. Weeks passed, and the world moved on, but Evelyn's name remained tainted. The scientific community had little tolerance for fraud, and doors that were once open to her were now firmly shut. I heard she tried to salvage what was left of her career, but without credibility, no one would take her seriously. The last I knew, she had left the city, retreating into obscurity. As for me, I focused on the future. Winning the award brought new opportunities, but more than that, it reminded me why I had started this journey in the first place, not for recognition, but for discovery. One evening, as I packed up my notes for my next project, I came across an old photograph of Evelyn and me as kids, sitting on the floor, building our first science experiment together. For the first time since everything happened, I felt something other than anger. Maybe one day, she would find her way back, not to science, but to herself. Until then, I had my own path to follow. And this time, I was walking it alone. The end.